So this is our community node testing session. This week we don't have anything in particular to test related to our development cadence. That's something we did last week, looking at the fairness property, and that was super helpful in validating if it was doing exactly what we wanted to do. And I can certainly talk more about that because it absolutely wasn't, as we can validate that we did continue to experience problems receiving the Genesis block in a timely way. And let's see, so that's what we did last week. This week, we intend to have just kind of an open conversation. I can talk about a little bit about the changes that are in RNode 9.8 that was released yesterday, and Tomasz upgraded the testnet an hour or so ago today, and it's plugging along quite nicely. A couple things to know related to the current testnet. There was a bug in RNode 9.7 that we didn't fully experience until last week, and then it's persisting in 9.8. And so I do want to talk a little bit about that because it affects you as a user of testnet. And in short, what the experience is if you are running a read-only node and you kill it, and you attempt then to start it again and rejoin the network, relying on whatever was stored in your block store. So let's say you had 30 blocks at the time that you killed it. When you restart, you will successfully pull the Genesis block from your block store, and you will observe that you can successfully rejoin the network. But very shortly after that, you will observe your node recording invalid blocks. And basically what's happening is that despite the fact that you had the Genesis block in your block store, Danyar and Łukasz were working earlier today, and just very recently, Danyar reported that there's a small bug in how that Genesis block was being stored in the block store, and then how your node was using it. And basically, in short, your node is then having information that doesn't match the rest of the blockchain. So your node observes these new blocks that the blockchain is that the rest of the network is adding to be invalid. And that's kind of a frustrating bug. It doesn't spread. It would just be on your node. So right now, if you're running a node and you need to kill it and restart, the best practice would be to also clear your rspace directory and just start over. Certainly frustrating if you're trying to save and persist data, but that's where we are today. Although it does look quite promising. Let me grab the link and share with you guys. Let's see, where did it go? Yep, here it is. You can take a look if you're very, very interested. Here's the bug, and if you look in that ticket, you will also see the PR that Łukasz put together and that Danyar just updated with a fix, which we're in the process of testing that right now. So hopefully that will be a fix, and we will include that in an upcoming release. Good news that you should notice with 9.8 is one of the pesky problems we had in 9.7 was that we would periodically your console typing would become invisible, either related to keygen or after killing the node, you might observe that your keystrokes became invisible. That bug has been fixed. Trying to think if there are other things that would be observable. It would be best if I didn't try and think and instead use the release plan. Let me grab that. And you're welcome to take a look as well. The link to the release plan is here in the chat. Slashing and the demo so slashing is now in the code base, and you could, if you were very interested, recreate the demonstration that Kent did it. I believe it was 3 weeks ago now at one of the community updates. We continue to work towards the full complement of the validation protocol, slashing, and validator rewards. You will notice in this current release there are some new rolling methods that will support that. They're not really usable just yet, but if you dig deep, you will see those. The important thing to call out here is that the new RSpace now runs by default. If you're a node operator, for the past several months, we've been putting in the flag store type as part of your run command. You no longer need to do that. The new RSpace runs by default. You do not need to specify it in your run command, and then with the next release, the old RSpace will be removed entirely. So that is certainly a change for node operators. We, as part of our effort to improve performance related to block proposing, this version of Node introduces soft checkpoints to RSpace. We do observe that it helps to some degree improve the rate of block proposals because of the way that Node then looks at RSpace using soft checkpoints. We will continue to see some of the other issues that we've observed in time to block proposal, and that's still under investigation, somewhat related to further optimization of the new RSpace, as well as ensuring that the consensus protocol is working as we'd like it to. What we tested last week was the splitting of the node discovery loop from the clear connections loop, which is it's a communication strategy that we were looking for optimizations. That didn't fully resolve our challenge related to getting the Genesis block in a timely way, and it certainly doesn't address all of the messaging you see as a node operator in logs related to requesting blocks and receiving blocks multiple times. Pavel is right now working on an improvement to message passing in the Casper layer to do a couple things. One is to obviously quiet those logs, quiet the rate of request and receive. Node really should, if it's received something, let's say it's received block A previously, it should not have to deal with more messages sending block A again and again and again. So we're working to improve the node's ability to recognize when it already has processed something, and then it could ignore other things that are in queue that are the same. And that would quiet logs, and it would certainly free up Node to be more attentive to things that are important. And I hope that would be included in the next release of RNode. The other thing, I checked, I think with all of you for sure, and with others as well, this version of Node does fully remove the faucet from the code base, so you cannot run a node and specify has faucet anymore. This is a great relief because we certainly would never ever want to release that as part of production code with a faucet. Bad news. There are other ways to generate tokens in Node at this point. You could put them, for example, in a wallet at Genesis if you're a dApp developer and you're just kind of messing around. And then going forward in the launch of testnet 2, we will fund a wallet, a vault at Genesis, and be able to distribute tokens to testnet users, just using a process where we would, you would request, I need tokens, and we would issue them to you on chain, and then those are the ones that you could play with. But I don't think this is a big breaking change for most of you, because I don't think most of you were using the faucet. It was something that we used largely related to a Genesis ceremony. So that, in a nutshell, is what is in the most recent release of RNode that I think you might run into as Node users. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Kelly, I've got a quick question regarding versioning. Mm-hmm. So we're on 0.9.8, and will testnet be 1.0, or do we continue to go to 9.9, then 9.9.1, and so forth? How is that going to work?
Yeah, so versioning of the release will just continue to grow. We'll do 9.9, 9.10, 9.11 until we get to the Mercury release. The test net, so there are, we have the network ID, and that's a way that we can separate different networks that are running the RChain software. The public RChain public testnet is currently running on, the network ID is testnet 1.5. And then what the plan is when we launch testnet 2, then we would shift the network ID up a number. So it would be testnet 2.1 is what we would do when we launch the testnet 2. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
Really, Node is very friendly about the network ID. I don't know if you guys have experienced this. I do it all the time because I forget which network ID we're using. But if you start a node with the incorrect network ID, Node will tell you that the bootstrap that you're connecting to is running a different network ID, and it will tell you what it is so that you can then improve your run command, which is quite nice if you're someone like me who never does it right the first time. Any other questions about the current release or about testnet? All right, I could talk a little bit about what's coming up then in the next release and things that I'm for this particular group that I am keen to have us investigate and play with. Obviously, something that is top of mind is the work that Pavel is doing as I described, to improve communications and message passing in Casper. And let me just drop a link to that ticket if you want to take a look at what he's doing. I saw a draft PR go in today. Basically, we're refactoring the feedback loop in Casper to improve message queuing. And when that gets in, that's something that I'd like to take a look at, just to make sure that, number one, node operators continue to have the information that they need, in logs, but also to hopefully observe just better and cleaner communications related to block passing, especially when it's related to the Genesis block. That's something that I would like to do with this group. We also have we will have the full implementation, I believe, of well, at least I think we're closing in. I think with the next release, we should be closing in on cost accounting and having that fully in place, where you as a node operator, as you're deploying, you would be able to observe the taking rev out of your wallet related to that deployment, and we would be able to observe validators receiving that rev as part of that deployment. That I anticipate that being available in the next release, which would be very, very good and certainly put us significantly closer to being able to launch testnet 2. That's one of the biggest blockers in launching testnet 2. The other blocker to launching testnet 2 is the ability to process a Genesis block with a full complement of ROC addresses, and that is also work of this current sprint, and Daniel is working on that to make sure that when we pull those ROC addresses, number one, the Genesis block containing all of that information is created successfully, and number two, related to some work that Kent has in review right now, making sure that those Ethereum addresses convert nicely to RevVault addresses at Genesis, so that you could then go and pull those Genesis issued Rev from the blockchain and take advantage of what's in your vault. So that is work that is, I anticipate, coming in the next release. Any questions about that?
have a question about the peak implementation. I've asked it in the dev channels, but asking again. So when I was thinking about if it is reasonable to build some kind of observer application to get data from the tuple space, I found out that there is two methods, produce and consume, that stores and get data from the tuple space, R space. So now when peak is implemented, is it reasonable, and can I build some application that will call some methods on the RSpace library that just get data out from there and not consume data from the channel? Is there some exposure of API that can be used outside of Rolang?
That's a good question. I just, Dom's on his way because he would be the one to answer this. Give him just a second. Thanks.
True.
Hey there, Dom. Hey, thank you. NetZipper was just asking a question about the peak implementation. NetZipper, could I ask you to repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. My question is derived from my thoughts about if it is reasonable to build some application to show data, like an observer of the data inside the R space, to get some data from the channels, like a block explorer, but it's more complicated how to do this with R space. But my question is, when the peak implementation is done, is there a way or to call some methods in the RSpace client library, which I can call and get data without changing RSpace state? So is there some exposure of peak outside of Rolang code?
No.
No. Okay.
The question is, what do you want to do with this? Well, okay, so let's back up a little bit. Are you interested in building a block explorer, or are you interested in interacting with RSpace? Because RSpace isn't blocks.
Maybe I'm understanding wrong way, but I was thinking that RSpace is like a database where the global state is saved, so I can.
For Rolang.
Sorry?
For Rolang.
For Rolang.
Yes, and okay, so maybe do we have the time for me to do a short explanation, like 5 minutes?
Oh yes, please.
Okay. RNode, or the whole arching platform, is split into two pieces. The one on one hand, we have Rolang execution, the air quotes, very heavy air quotes, virtual machine that executes Rolang. And on the other hand, we have Casper, which governs block creation and population of data and consistency, basically consistency. So RSpace is tailored to support Rolang. And with some modifications, it is being used by Casper to be able to create blocks. So when you're running against RSpace, you're seeing milestones of the state that was produced by Rolang via deploy execution. So to say that again, in different words, when you're executing deploys, the Rolang virtual machine executes code, and this code at some point is being checkpointed, frozen in time, and plopped into blocks. And this is the try state, which is then represented in the RSpace history try. But if you're trying to build a block explorer, there is not enough data in RSpace to be able to track everything that happened in the virtual machine for Rolang. this is exactly the reason we are working on a reporting API that would give you all the data that you need. But this isn't done yet. So we have this planned. It's not highest priority, sadly, at the moment. We have bigger fish to fry at the moment. But if you're trying to build a block explorer solely by looking at RSpace, I fear that that's not enough, because RSpace is unaware of blocks. We have a separate DAG, block DAG layer, which is tailor fit for Casper, which tracks blocks. So in other words, we have an abstraction that tracks blocks, and we have a abstraction that tracks tri-states. And the RSpace plus tuple space modifications for Roland, these two pieces, these two layers are tailor fit for Roland, with the caveat that we are able to checkpoint and hold the checkpoint hash in place and put it in a block and then refer to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Dom, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. So to answer your question regarding the Block Explorer, we are working on providing a proper API that would give you the state, as in-flight state, whatever Roland does, and then we can introspect values and replay and use a read-only node to give you all that to be able to build a proper Block Explorer, but that's not done yet.
Yeah,
so yeah.
That's nice to know. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions about Peak and the role it will play? All right, thank you, Dom.
No worries.
I have another question about Peak. Is there a way to make a query on the rev-world balance using Peak, or for example, when I deploy two, when I make two deploys, when I make two deploys to two different validators, and each deploy contain check-in balance of a particular address, does these two blocks be considered as conflicting?
Okay, so to answer that question, I have to put a heavy caveat on the answer, because it is possible to tailor code such that it will not conflict using Peak. But if you try to modify the same rev vault in two different blocks, the modification will be conflicting. You cannot double spend the same money. So the idea behind Peak is not to allow double spending. It's to solve a technical limit. It's not a limitation. It's just the way Roland was coined did not take into account Peak in the specification that we implemented. And when we arrived at the point that the conflicts started piling up, the decision was made to provide and I have to agree with Ken, it's an optimization it's an implementation that will improve performance. But still, the performance is very important. And yeah, so circling back. This Peak mechanism will be available in Roland, so you will be able to write a Roland piece of code that utilizes Peak. And if you utilize Peak in a proper fashion, you will get a read-only value on a particular channel. So you define a continuation, a contract, you define a channel that it depends on, and you say, I will only read from this data. And everyone else only reads from this particular channel, for example, from the rev vault map. We will allow merging of this information from multiple blocks, therefore not conflicting and not causing a orphaned block. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. But my question was, we have a bunch of Roland codes to create genesis vault to get vault balance, and my understanding was that if I deploy, if I make two deploys to different validators with the piece of code that just check balance, Now these two deploys are considered as conflicting.
Yes, and we are the reason why we're delivering peak is to remove this limitation.
Yeah, and at the moment in this node version, there is not check and balance with peak implemented.
Peak was implemented in RSpace, so the layer that is only RSpace specific. We still need to deliver it in Casper and in Roland.
Okay, thank you.
So only when the three are ready, then we have fully functioning peak.
I got, thank you.
Any other questions about peak? Just in terms of timeline of full completion, so we anticipate this sprint we are working on the implementation of peak in both Rolang and in Casper, and that's what we're working towards. So hopefully we can get that done quickly. Any other questions related to either the current release, the current state of testnet, upcoming work? Okay. I really don't have anything else to add during this time, and I don't know that we need to continue to hold the time in the room if there's nothing else to discuss. I do want to remind you that we do have this bug on the current testnet. If you do plan to run a node and intend to kill it and restart it, you do need to clear your RSpace directory to be successful. It looks like we should have a fix to that in the near term, but that is the state of things right now. And also as a reminder, with the upgrade of testnet, you do need to change the network ID that you use at the point of connection, and today that is testnet 1.5. Is there anything else anyone wants to talk about? All right, thanks, gentlemen. Hope to see you next week, and I also hope to be in a position where we can do some more hands-on testing related to some of the work that Pavel is doing. Thanks so much for your time today, and see you next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.